This evening, we are going to speak about Abram's faith. Abram's faith is very special because he was Paul or Shaul's hero of faith.
What you're saying is that bad things can happen to good people.
Now, Avram went up from Egypt, he, his wife, and everything he had, and Lot with him into the Negev. And Avram became wealthy with much cattle, silver, and gold. And he went on his travels from the Negev. He came to Bethel, to the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Ai, where he had first built the altar. And there Avram called on the name of Yudhe-Vaveh. And certainly from the faith in that time, he would have sacrificed to Yudhe-Vaveh again. So this means that this altar and sacrificing on it would mean that again he died to self and to his sin and was resurrected to new life through the sacrifices he brought. But Avram was very rich, and he continued, he called on Yudhe-Vaveh and then continues with him. Lot, who was also traveling with Avram, also had flocks, herds, and tents, but the land could not support their living together because their possessions were too great for them to remain together. However, quarreling arose between Avram's and Lot's herdsmen. The Kenani and the Perizi were then living in the land. Avram said to Lot, "Please, let's not have quarreling between me and you, between my herdsmen and yours, since we kinsmen. Isn't the land there in front of you? Please separate yourself from me. If you go to the left, I will go to the right. If you go to the right, I will go to the left." So Avram understood this quarreling to be something that was totally ungodly and should not happen. And therefore he asked that there should be separation between Lot and himself. So Lot also was rich, and this conflict between the workers, Avram asked him to separate from him and gave him the first choice in everything. So Lot looked up and saw that the whole plain of the Jordan, was well watered everywhere before Yudhe-Vaveh destroyed Sodom and Amorah, like the garden of Yudhe-Vaveh, like the land of Egypt in the direction of Tzoar. So Lot chose all the plain of the Jordan for himself, and Lot traveled eastward. Thus they separated themselves from each other. Avram lived in the land of Canaan, and Lot lived in the cities of the plain, setting up his tent near Sodom. Now the men of Sodom were evil, committing great sins against Yudhe-Vaveh. And sitting in the gates along with these people, as we know Lot actually did, he must have known that they were evil. And he also must have known that the principle is that he should not be unequally yoked. So he chooses riches and affluence. He chooses the best. And Lot misses the point. He chooses riches amongst sinners, and does not choose to be amongst those who are godly. So he doesn't do what the logical thing would have been to say to his uncle that he would work with these people so that the incident would not repeat, but that he should stay with Avram. So they separate, and then Lot is taken captive. When the kings come up against the Sodom and Gomorrah, and then when Avram heard that his nephew had been taken captive, he led out his trained men who had been born in his house, 318 of him, and went in pursuit as far as Dan. So Avram knew that something was wrong. But in spite of the fact that Lot had turned against him a little bit like an enemy by choosing the best, he went to save him. And during the night, he and his servants divided his forces against them, then attacked and pursued them all the way to Hova, north of Damascus. He recovered all the goods and brought back his nephew Lot with his goods, together with the women and the other people. So here he goes with 318 people, which is just a band. by comparison with the armies of all the kings that are mentioned who came up against Sodom and Gomorrah and took Lot away. And then he brought Lot back with his goods. And still Lot did not get the message that Sodom and Gomorrah were evil places and that he would be better off with his uncle. So Avram saves Lot, and he is victorious with a few and brings everything back. And Lot must have experienced Avram's power, but chooses to remain in Sodom amongst the sinful people. After his return from slaughtering Kedar-Laomer and the kings with him, the king of Sodom went to meet him in the Shaveh Valley, also known as the King's Valley. And then Melchizedek, the king of Shalom, brought out bread and wine. He was Kohen of El Elyon, of Elohim Most High, so he blessed him with these words. Blessed be Avram by El Elyon, maker of the heaven and the earth, and blessed be Elyon, who handed your enemies over to you. And Avram gave him a tithe of everything. So the question is, who is this? And according to Paul, this Melchizedek is eternal king without beginning or end. He is the king of righteousness, because that is what Melchizedek means. And that Melchizedek, who is eternal king without beginning or end, and also eternal priest without beginning or end, is Yeshua HaMashiach. And he shares bread and wine with Avram. Now, bread and wine are the usual order in which the bread and the wine are used at the Sabbath. But bread and wine can also be turned around and be wine and bread, and then they're in the order of the Passover. So that by what manner of speaking, Melchizedek, the king of righteousness, was celebrating the Sabbath, but also the Passover with Avram already, even before Yeshua HaMashiach. And this was Yeshua HaMashiach celebrating the Passover with him. Sometime later, the word of Yudevave came to Avram in a vision. Don't be afraid, Avram. I am your protector, and your reward will be very great. Avram replied, Yudevave Elohim, what good will your gifts be to me if I continue childless, and Eliezer from Damascus inherits my possessions? You haven't given me a child. Avram continued, so someone born in my house will be my heir. But the word of Yudevave came to him and said, this man will not be your heir. No, your heir will be a child from your own body. So again, Elohim appears to Abram. Whilst Abram is saying that there is no heir, again, Yudevave promises that there will be a physical heir. And then Avram says, Yudevave Elohim, how am I to know that I will possess it? So he's asking for a sign. He answered him, bring me a 3-year-old cow, a heifer, a 3-year-old male goat, a 3-year-old ram, and a dove and a young pigeon. And clearly the 3-year-old cow is a representation of the red heifer that died to atone for death. For the 3-year-old female goat, the sin offering for an ordinary person in the nation. The 3-year-old ram, the sin offering for a leader in the nation. But also Yeshua himself, who was to be the sin offering for everyone. And a dove and a young pigeon. He brought him all these, cut the animals in two, and placed the pieces opposite each other, but he didn't cut the birds in half. Birds of prey swooped down on the carcasses, but Avram drove them away. As the sun was about to set, a deep sleep fell on Avram. Horror and great darkness came over him. In the days of Avram, the way that the covenant was cut between two people who were making a physical covenant with each other is that they halved their animals, and those making the covenant together moved between the carcasses. And what they actually said to each other is, may what happened to these animals happen to us if we do not keep this covenant that we have made. And after the sun had set, there was a thick darkness, and a smoking firepot and a flaming torch appeared, which passed between these animal parts. So this means that Abraham did not move between the portions of the animal, but that it was only Elohim who appeared as a firepot and a flaming torch. And in that way, he made the covenant with Abraham, but he is the only guarantor of the covenant. And Abraham is not a guarantor to the Elohim makes a covenant with himself. And the smoking firepot is, by way of speaking, a uterus in which new life arises, as in Yeshua. But this is particularly important because this whole promise is about a promise of an heir. So the smoking firepot and the uterus within which it is to arise then actually belong to Elohim himself. And the flaming torch, which is male, also moves between the two halves of the animal. And a pregnancy arises, which actually is what Isaac's spiritual origin is. There is this deed that God makes, and God himself is the only guarantor of the pregnancy that is to come. Abraham does not act as a guarantor in this at all. So his dead body is not to be the guarantor of his success in the pregnancy. And then only Elohim moves between the two halves, and Abraham is an onlooker. The guarantee is Elohim himself, and that is irreversible. That day, Elohim made a covenant with Avram. I have given this land to your descendants, from the valley of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates River, the territory of the Keni, the Kenezi, the Kadmoni, the Hitti, the Perizi, the Rephaim, the Emori, the Canaani, the Girgashi, and the Yevusi. So Yudevave takes the land away from others. He gives it to Abraham and to his future descendants. Then Genesis 16, now Sarai, Avram's wife, had not borne him a child, but she had an Egyptian slave girl called Hagar. So Sarai said to Avram, here now, Yudevave has kept me from having go in and sleep with my slave girl. Maybe I'll be able to have children through her. Avram listened to what Sarai said. It was after Avram had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan that Sarai, Avram's wife, took Hagar the Egyptian, her slave girl, and gave her to Abram, her husband, to be his wife. Avram had sexual relations with Hagar, and she conceived. But when she became aware that she was pregnant, she looked on her mistress with contempt. Abram fathers a child, a descendant, but Hagar treats Sarah with contempt and is chased away. Then she's in the desert and with a child that clearly is going to die if there isn't some intervention. And the angel of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh said to her, go back to your mistress and submit to authority. Everywhere else in the scripture where the angel of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh appears, it is Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh who speaks. So this is also Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh who speaks. He is the physical appearance of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, because no one has seen the Father but the Son, and who has seen the Son has seen the Father. One must surmise that the angel of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh is Yeshua. And he says, go back to your mistress and submit to her authority. The angel of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh said to her, I will greatly increase your descendants, and there will be so many that it will be impossible to count them. The angel of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh said to her, look, you are pregnant, and you will give birth to a son. You are to call him Ishmael. Elohim pays attention, because Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh has paid attention to your misery. He will be a wild donkey of a man, with his hand against everyone and everyone's hand against him, having his life at odds with all his kin. So the angel of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, or Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh who speaks, is Yeshua. And he says to her, humble yourself and return. And then he promises a great descendancy. And as is known, that is about 1.5 billion people now. Ishmael means that Elohim pays attention, but he's a wild donkey. And in terms of the Torah, a wild donkey that is not redeemed has his neck broken, and therefore, by manner of speaking, is removed as head of the household. When Avram was 99 years old, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh appeared to Avram and said to him, I am El Shaddai, Elohim Almighty. Walk in my presence and be pure-hearted. I will make my covenant between me and you, and I will increase your numbers greatly. Avram fell on his face. Elohim continued speaking with him. As for me, this is my covenant with you. You will be the father of many nations. Your name will no longer be Avram, exalted father, but your name will be Avraham, father of many, because I have made you the father of many nations. I will cause you to be very fruitful. I will make nations of you. Kings will descend from you. So the promise to Avram at 99, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh appears to him a second time, with a promise of many descendants. And his name then changes to Abraham, the father of a multitude of nations. And this is also through Ishmael, through the wild donkey. Genesis 17:7, I am establishing my covenant between me and you, along with your descendants after you, generation after generation, as an everlasting covenant, to be your Elohim for you and for your descendants after you. The promise to Avram too is the promise of a great descendancy. The covenant also applies to the descendants, and this does not exclude Ishmael. Elohim said to Avram, as for you, you are to keep my covenant, you and your descendants after you, generation after generation. Here is my covenant, which you are to keep between me and you, along with your descendants after you. Every male among you is to be circumcised. You are to be circumcised in the flesh of your foreskin. Here is the sign of the covenant between me and you. Generation after generation, every male among you who is 8 days old is to be circumcised, including slaves born within your household and those bought from a foreigner, not descended from you. The slave born in your house and the person bought with your money must be circumcised. Thus my covenant will be in your flesh as an everlasting covenant. The covenant is to be handed down to the children on the 8th day. A week has 7 days, and the 8th day only exists in the eternal dimension, in eternity, and it prepares the boy for eternity, and therefore for the eternal covenant that God is making with him. The foreskin is removed. Yeshua is our circumcision. He is cut away from man as sin, so the foreskin is also cut away as sin. And he is Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh's circumcision for Abram's descent, the circumcision that brings people into the eternity. Avram took Ishmael, his son, all the slaves born in his house and all who had been bought with his money, every male among the people in Avram's household, and circumcised the flesh of the foreskin that very day, just as Elohim had said to him. Avram was 99 years old when he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin, and Ishmael his son was 13 years old when he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin. Avram and Ishmael his son were circumcised on the same day, and all the men in his household, both slaves born in his house and those bought with money from a foreigner, were circumcised with him. Avram includes Ishmael in the covenant. He was 13 years old. 13 is the number of love, because 6 is the number of man, and 7 is the cardinal number of Elohim. So 6 plus 7 makes 13, and that is the number of love, expressing Elohim's love also for Ishmael.
Ishmael was circumcised.
Yeah.
And Islam today recognizes Abraham as their father. So I was wondering, in a very, very practical sense, do they practice circumcision? Because it was given to their Ishmael forefather as well to be circumcised.
Yes, they're uniformly circumcised. Yes, but the thing is that they circumcise, and they're supposed to be part of Abraham's household, but they have changed the scriptures by saying that it was Ishmael who was sacrificed and not Isaac. So by just doing that, they're off the track completely, and they miss the issue of who is the real ram that is to be circumcised. And obviously that happens to Israel as a nation as well. So there's a triple descendancy for Isaac, for Abraham, and they're actually the Jews, the Christians, and the Islamites. And obviously at this stage, the Islamites are following Satan. The Jews are not following the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, even though they think so. And because of issues that we've already discussed and the deep division between the different parts of the church also is not worshipping the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, because if they were, they would be in unity with each other. Because what happened in Galatians is there are people that said to the Galatians that you need to be circumcised and to keep the whole Torah. And Paul said those people should actually maim themselves and cut it all off instead of trying to circumcise people, because they're taking the people away from the essence of the faith. Because what they were doing, they were trying to make Jews of the people, and what the gospel was that Shaul was preaching is he was preaching that you should all be coming to righteousness. Now, if you depend on your circumcision to be your righteousness and on the law, then you're living in legalism. And when you're living in legalism, you're actually drawing a line through the cross and you're making nothing of it. So these things all sort of come into one place to say that for believers out of the nations, it is not necessary to have themselves circumcised. Actually, it is not desirable to have yourselves circumcised. And then there's a whole discussion that goes on, and it ends up saying there may be no idolatry. And at that stage, when new people came to faith, idolatry was determined by the Jews who believed, because they knew what idolatry is. And idolatry was defined in Deuteronomy as anything that the nations worship their gods with, you are not to do in worship of your God, because that is idolatry. The second thing is, he said there's to be no sexual immorality. And sexual immorality means cheating on your wife. It also means cheating on God. And so it's actually idolatry again. But the third thing is the opposite of sexual immorality is being absolutely reliable in everything you do and say. So you must be absolutely reliable, never tell a lie, never make any skew remarks, never participate in anything where you can create a misunderstanding in any way, shape, or form. And the third thing they said, the third thing is actually don't eat strangled animals. We'll return to that. And then they say do not participate of blood. And to participate of blood in the Jewish context is to commit murder. So the opposite of murder is love. So he was saying, learn what it is to really love the Lord your God. Don't participate in idolatry. Be absolutely reliable to God, to your wife, and to everybody. And learn to love all people. And those three things are the center of this all. And to that, he added, and do not eat what is strangled, because a strangled animal is not a kosher animal, and Jews are not allowed to eat that. So it actually is saying, go and eat what is kosher, because if you eat what is kosher, you will have admission to Jewish homes. And then you can learn from them what it is to live righteously. And then it says, for Moses is preached in all the synagogue, has been preached in all the synagogues since the beginning, which actually means the rest of the Torah you can go and learn in the synagogue. And this actually says that there are things that have to be done first, and these first things that you have to do are the milk of faith.
The history continues, and in Genesis 18, verses 17 to 20, Yudevave says, should I hide from Avram what I'm about to do, inasmuch as Avram is sure to become a great and strong nation, and all the nations of the earth will be blessed by him. For I have made myself known to him, so that he will give orders to his children and to his household after him, to keep the way of Yudevave and to do what is right and just, so that Yudevave may bring about for Avram what he has promised him. Yudevave said, the outcry against Sodom and Amorah is so great, and their sin so serious. Avram, in terms of what is said here, could teach his descendants how to live righteously. In other words, how to hear the voice, obey it, and have it counted to them as righteousness. And Yudevave speaks to Avram about Sodom and Amorah. Then the men turned away and went towards Sodom, but Avram remained standing before Yudevave. Then Avram approached him and said, will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked? What if there are 50 righteous people in the city? Will you really sweep it away and not spare the place for the sake of 50 righteous people in it? Now, Avram knew full well at this stage that there was only one righteous man in the city, and that was Lot, but he was starting to plead for Lot. Far be it from you to do such a thing, to kill the righteous with the wicked, treating the righteous and the wicked alike. Far be it from you. Will not the judge of all earth do right? Yudevave said, I will find 50. If I find 50 righteous people in the city of Sodom, I will spare the whole place for their sake. So if there's a righteous community within Sodom, then they will be spared, because a righteous community will have the ability that Avram has, and that is to teach all the people in the city the truth and to bring them into a relationship with Yudevave. And he continued negotiating for 45, 40, 30, 20. Then he said, may Yudevave not be angry, but let me speak just one more. What if only 10 can be found? He answered, for the sake of 10, I will not destroy it. Then when Yudevave had finished speaking with Avram, he left, and Avram returned home. So Avram stopped speaking when the issue became 10 men. He was actually pleading for the righteous Lot. And he was pleading that the city be saved for a minyan, which is a congregation ruled by 10 righteous men, because 10 is the rulership of a congregation. So 10 righteous men can lead a righteous community and teach the community righteousness, but it doesn't exist in the cities. And for that reason, Avram stops arguing. Avram knows that he has laid the groundwork for Lot to be saved, which then happened with the destruction of the cities with their unrighteous communities. In Genesis 22, verses 1 to 3, sometime later, Avram tested Avram. He said to him, Avram, Here I am, he replied. Then Elohim said, take your son, your only son whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain that I will show you. Early the next morning, Avram got up, loaded his donkey, took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. When he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place Elohim had told him about. Avram took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac, and he himself carried the fire and the knife. And the 2 of them went together. Isaac spoke up and said to his father Avram, Father, yes, my son. Avram answered, the fire and wood are here. Isaac said, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? Avram answered him, Elohim himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. And the 2 of them went on together. Yudevave asked Avram to sacrifice his son. Avram heard the voice and he obeyed. Avram took everything for the sacrifice, so the fire and the knife and the wood. And Isaac asked, where is the lamb? And Avram said, Elohim will provide. And the original Hebrew can be read to understand, and will provide himself the ram, which eventually did in Yeshua. When they reached the place Elohim had told him about, Avram built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay him. But the angel of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh came to him from heaven. Avram, here I am, he replied. Do not lay a hand on the boy. He said, do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear Elohim, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son. Abraham looked up, and there in a thicket he saw a ram caught by its horns. He went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. So the voice of heaven, which clearly was Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh himself, came and spoke to Abraham and said that he was not to hurt the boy. And then Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh did what Abraham had said that he would do. Now, Abraham clearly believed one of a couple of things. Abraham was completely happy to give his son. But then if his son was slain, he also believed that his son would be resurrected from the dead. So in Abraham's belief about what would happen on the altar, he actually already believed in the death and the resurrection of the Messiah. The angel of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, who is Yeshua, says, you have not withheld your son from me. Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh also did not withhold his son, his only son, Yeshua. And the angel of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, the Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, provides the ram, and later the real ram,